I was talking with my neighbor once who was starting a new law practice. He said sometimes he wakes up early with 1,000 different things going through his mind about what he could do that day. There's always billable work he could be doing, clients he could be servicing, marketing he could be doing, and other things to grow his practice. All of us experience this type of thing more than we'd like these days. More to do than we feel like we have time to do. How do we decide what to do in the moment and get the most important things done without unnecessary distraction and friction? Beyond this, with your week planned, which we've talked about previously, and your projects and actions organized, how do you make them happen in the moment, every day? Here we are going to look at a few principles for making each day as effective as it can be. The first principle is this: plan your day. We talk a lot about planning. There's weekly planning. We talked about long-term planning, and above that, vision and goals, which are slightly different than planning. And planning is something we also have to bring down to the level of our specific day. Now, you've already created a more detailed weekly plan, so your daily planning doesn't have to be super involved. What I will just say about it is start your day by looking at your weekly plan. Look at it, and then you might jot down maybe 3 or 4 chief things you want to accomplish that day based on your weekly plan. And there's probably new stuff that has come up. Write those down. Then you have a basic framework for the day, and you're not just going about the day randomly. The second principle is schedule your day at only 70% capacity or less. Do not fill your day to the brim with appointments and tasks. This is a recipe for failure and frustration, let alone missing out on some of the most important and interesting aspects of life. I love the way Stephen Covey puts this. Bulldozing through a ton of scheduled appointments and to-dos sets you up for frustration. The nature of most days will violate that expectation, and you'll miss some of the richest, most meaningful dimensions of living. Chances are also good that for much of that time, you won't be putting first things first. There is a second reason for not scheduling yourself at full capacity. You operate better when you have space to think. This is stated best in the book, The Next Level: What Insiders Know About Executive Success. When you think about it, absolutely everything anyone does starts with a thought, because the quality of the thought has a large influence on the quality of the outcome. It makes sense to do what you can to think clearly. In a world in which technology provides the capacity to reach out and be reached anytime, anywhere, finding space to think clearly is more and more of a challenge. A lack of white space on one's calendar correlates with a lack of white space in one's brain. Don't get so enamored with your schedule or system that you don't have time to think. When your brain is always engaged, your best and brightest ideas do not emerge. And of course, we saw earlier in a previous session about the ringing effect. If you schedule yourself beyond 70%, you are setting yourself up for that. The third principle is this: consolidate your time into large chunks. Peter Drucker is right when he says to have small dribs and drabs of time at your disposal. It will not be sufficient even if the total is an impressive number of hours. Important and creative tasks require concentration, and concentration requires time. If you simply seek to fit the work that requires high concentration in wherever you can throughout the day, you will often be less effective and not gain the level of concentration that you need. You will not get into the zone and gain the momentum which brings the great ideas and brings actually the efficiency in getting the task done quickly. Drucker also has this other excellent quote, which is worth mentioning. Most of the tasks of the executive require, for minimum effectiveness, a fairly large quantum of time. To spend in one stretch less than this minimum is sheer waste. One accomplishes nothing and has to begin all over again. To be effective, every knowledge worker and especially every executive therefore needs to be able to dispose of time in fairly large chunks. I think he captures most of our experience very well in that quote. The fourth principle is this: do one thing at a time. When you are extremely busy, it is especially tempting to splinter yourself and work on too many fronts at once. Avoid this trap. Instead, identify what is most important, start there, and then build momentum by doing one thing at a time, bringing it to completion, and then moving on to the next thing. What's best next? You might think this makes it take longer to do things, but it actually saves time. The scarcity of time is precisely the reason that we need to do one thing at a time. As Drucker says, if there is any one secret of effectiveness, it is concentration. Effective executives do first things first, and they do one thing at a time. Concentration, therefore, saves time. The more that we can concentrate our time and effort and attention, the greater the number of tasks we will actually be able to do, and the greater diversity of tasks we will be able to do. The precise reason we need to do one thing at a time is because we have so many things to do, and doing them one at a time allows us to get them done faster. Drucker captures it so well. He says, this is the secret of those people who do so many things, and apparently so many difficult things. They do only one at a time. As a result, they need much less time in the end than the rest of us. The fifth principle is this: see your day in terms of people and relationships first, not tasks. Creating connections and interacting with people is the most important part of your work. Tasks matter and are important and fun, but tasks have to take a back seat to people. Ask in everything, not just how can I get this task done, but how can I build others up? This really brings us back to the fundamental rock bottom principle behind everything that we've seen. You are here to do good for others to the glory of God. And so all productivity practices, all of our work, everything is given to us by God for the purpose of bringing benefit to others. Therefore, let's be deliberate and intentional about bringing these principles and this philosophy and mission into our work, both the work we get paid for and the work in running and living our personal lives. The seventh principle is this: utilize the key question in the moment, which is, what's best next? That's a variation. You might wonder, where does the title, What's Best Next, come from? And it actually comes from two places. First, Dan Fuller, who was one of John Piper's mentors, pointed out that the key question in the Christian life, the key question of sanctification, is not what would Jesus do, as important as that is, but what's best next. We are to look at what Jesus would do, but there's also we aren't Jesus. So there are going to be a few differences. And so the core question is from Ephesians 5:15 through 17, which is actually what Fuller was referring to when he said we need to be always asking, what's best next? WBN. That's the core question of sanctification. And I thought that was a very helpful point that he made, because I see time management as very related to sanctification, because really time management is about how we live our lives, spend our time every day. That's really sanctification. So they overlap. And so Ephesians 5:15 through 17, which is on time management, ultimately puts it in the context of sanctification. And what's best next, the question, is referring back to that passage. The second place the term what's best next comes from is Alan Lakin, a popular time management thinker from the 70s, distilled things down to this specific question: what is the best use of my time right now? And lots of leaders throughout society have really used that as a guide to guide them in how they use their time. And I found it very effective. And I found it effective too, to boil things down to one question: either what's the best use of my time right now? Or in other words, what's best next? Thinking of that in the biblical context of Ephesians 5. This helps you overcome the temptation to distraction that often happens after an interruption even. After an unexpected visitor or interruption, you recalibrate yourself by asking yourself, what's the best use of my time right now? So you can get focused again. Or when you feel overwhelmed with so many things going on and you feel like you don't even have the time to plan, you can just step back and say, okay, what's best next? What's not what's everything I have to do? What's the next thing I need to do? And not just anything, but the best thing. And if we just ask ourselves that question, it can really help us get through a lot of periods of overwhelm and overload when we just feel like we don't even have the time to figure out our plans. So these are 7 principles for making things happen in the moment every day. This is where the rubber meets the road. What we're going to look at in the next session is how a proper understanding of productivity now lifts our eyes up from the road right before us to a broader concern for our organizations and communities and society in general.